A pinch hitter. Have you ever heard of that term? Well, in the game of baseball, if a batter comes up to the plate to hit the ball, his coach may call him back to the dugout and he'll insert another player to go to bat for him. That player, now going up to bat, is called a pinch hitter. And he then becomes a substitute for the other player. The Bible, it has the best example of a pinch hitter that I think you'll ever find in literature. Another term you're probably more familiar with is the term substitute. But these two batters at the plate that I'm going to describe, they couldn't be more different. And I mean more different. One's going to take the place of the other. And he's going to have a walk-off home run. And he's going to win the ball game for his team. Now, I want you to sit back, watch the play-by-play that I'm going to tell you about, and I'll be the broadcaster. I'll pretend like I was old Foster Hewitt in Canada years ago calling the hockey game. It's early in the morning. There's been a prison swap. Barabbas, the prisoner, he's been incarcerated in the large city jail downtown, and he's been sitting on death row, convicted of murder. The authorities, they're now moving him to a holding cell in another building nearer the execution grounds. The jail cell is small. Just above the prisoner's head is a little square window. Only a squirrel could get through. Barabbas, he takes a peek through that little window. He could see the execution hill over there in the distance. He sat back down on his little stool, and he leaned his back against the stone wall, and he's only now got a few hours left in life. He doesn't move. He places his hands over his cheeks, and he just stares at the flagstone floor. His mouth didn't move, which is a bit odd because usually he never shuts his mouth. When the guards transferred Barabbas at sunrise that morning from the other barracks, he boasted that by noon he'd be dead and he'd join all the other bodies that he had murdered. In his bravado, he cursed the guards and he mocked their Caesar. He was like a little kid who had received a new toy. Playing with the guards, that was his sport, kind of an entertainment. But now, in the new holding cell, he's very quiet. And he becomes very still. He now has nothing to say. He has nobody to talk to. His face takes on a pink blush. He's not bragging now. He knows by noon he's going to be crucified, dead at sundown. As he faces the floor, he pictures in his head the cross that he's going to die on, the nails that are going to pin him to it, the torturous death, the mocking crowd. He knows all this, and he knows it's waiting him. And now he finds it very hard to swallow. He could even be heard quietly calling for his mother. Just a block away from that little square window is a Roman fortress where the governor lives. The ruler's name is Pilate. He's presiding over a court case. Gathered in front of the building is a large crowd, and they're mostly religious leaders. They're shouting their disapproval. These men, and they're all bearded, long robes, stern faces, fists in the air, shouting blasphemies, and the noise gets louder and louder. There are even some ladies there with the little children. They're watching all this. At the top of the steps, in front of the large doors, two figures are standing. And they're standing on that stone platform. One is Pilate, the Roman governor, dressed in his royal red robes. The other, he's a bedraggled Galilean. His face is streaked with blood from the crown of thorns that he's wearing on his head. A Roman soldier, spear in hand, he gestures to the crowd for them to be silent. All becomes still. Pilate, seeing this, he opens his mouth. It's found in Luke 23, verse 14. Here's what he said. You, pointing to the crowd, you brought me this man who was inciting the people to rebellion. Well, I've examined him in your presence, and I have found there's no basis for your charges against this man. Well, neither has Herod, for he sent him back to me. And he said the same thing. He's done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I'm going to release him. But with one voice, they cried out, away with him. Away with this man. Release Barabbas. We want Barabbas, not this man, who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city for murders. That last sentence, that probably says it all. Barabbas, rebel, murderer, violent, blood in his hands, defiant, troublemaker, and he was even cocky. There was Jesus. Just the opposite. Meek. Opened not his mouth. Pilate treats him with grace. The crowd roars, free Barabbas! Crucify Jesus! Pilate, now a bit defiant, he points to Christ. He has done nothing to deserve death. Do you know, I think the man, Pilate, he had a lot of guts. And he had all these guts right in front of this ruling mob. If Jesus was guilty, let him pay the price for his crimes. The Galilean, before him, it didn't really mean anything to him. Jesus didn't mean anything to him coming from Galilee. But he could see as being governor. One was guilty and one was innocent. And Pilate knew who was innocent. If Jesus is innocent, then set him free. The mocking crowd, who really is the one that's speaking to Pilate, they would have nothing to do with that. Crucify him. We want Barabbas. Well, 4 times, count them, 4 times, Pilate tried to free Jesus. 1, he started by telling the Jews, you settle it. He's yours. John 18:28. Leave Rome out of it. It's a Jewish matter. Don't pin it on us. Secondly, he then refers Jesus to Herod. He's the Jewish king. Herod, you settle the matter. You call yourself a Jewish king, you do it. Luke 23:4. Thirdly, it comes the prisoner release policy. At the time of the Passover, the authorities, the Romans, they would usually release somebody who had a very, very serious criminal record. So Pilate, he tries to persuade the Jews, Mark 15:6. You let Jesus go free, and I'll let a prisoner go free in exchange. What does the crowd do? We don't want that. We want him crucified. 4, finally, it's this scene. In front of the royal palace, Pilate says, I find no fault in him. John 18:38. Pilate tried to do his job. The crowd wouldn't let him. We want Barabbas. Jesus doesn't deserve the cross. Pilate knows that. He tries to set him free. It didn't work. The crowd won. The crowd got its wish. Do you know who else got his wish? This might surprise you. God in heaven. God in heaven. He got his wish too. His own son. He being the Heavenly Father. He got his wish. Crucify him, came the echo from heaven. God repeated the words of the crowd. You're kidding. It was God's voice, chiming in with the loud voice of the crowd. Wait a minute. Come on. Isn't Jesus the one Lord that Paul said in 1 Corinthians 5:21 he knew no sin? That was your son. Isn't this the Jesus that could have broken bread with the devil in the wilderness in the temptation story, but he refused? And he told the devil to get lost? That was your son. What about Gethsemane? He told his Father in heaven, not my will, but thine be done. In other words, Father, whatever you want me to do, it's in your hands. I'll do it for you. God, are you going to crucify your own son? Surely. You're not going to take that part with the crowd. Surely. We're talking about the Son of God. Hebrews 4:15. He was in all points, tempted as we are, and yet without sin. God. Jesus is your earthly Nobel Prize winner. If everybody was like him, you could lay off these police guards. These Roman guards would be out of business. If you took him down to a recent RCMP office where I live and do a crime check, you'd find he had nothing on his record. On earth, Jesus had all kinds of distractions, but when it came to sin, he was never guilty. The Bible says he was without sin. Now compare that to you and me. Compare that to the crowd in front of Pilate, screaming at him, crucify him. Do you know how the Bible describes you and me? I'll give you a list. Luke 19:10 says we're lost. John 3:16, it says we're deemed to be perish. John 3:36, we're under the wrath of God. 2 Corinthians 4:3, we're blinded. Ephesians 2:12, strangers having no hope without God in the world. You're kidding. Philippians 3:8, rubbish. We're rags before a holy God. In other words, Barabbas, we're just like you. John Newton, I think he said it best in his wonderful hymn, Amazing Grace. Do you remember how that first verse goes? Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saves a wretch like me. We don't use that word wretch anymore in our society. You're not allowed to use that word. No, 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 no. Our society, we can't even use the word wicked. You don't call anybody a wretch. Shame on you. Well, what do you call them? Oh, you just call them misguided. Just a little bit of we're misguided. That's better. We're poorly parented. Oh, yeah, that's even best. We're unfortunate. Yeah, that's good. Maybe a little addicted. We could be broke. We could be homeless, but we're never wretched. Don't use that word sin. Use God's name in vain instead. It's more appropriate. Everybody uses it. There's safety in numbers. The crowd said that. Crucify him. Those are the words of the crowd. The Bible doesn't shy away from some of their stinging indictments. In Isaiah 53:6, that's fairly clear. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each one of us has turned to our own way. Everybody's doing it. Gone his way without God. There's none righteous. You can't even find one. No, not one, says God. Together we're worthless. No one seeks. Not even one, says Romans 3:10. Well, what can I do about it? I want you to start where God starts. Jesus became Barabbas. He pinch hitted for him. He who knew no sin now becomes a murderer. He made him a rebel. He made Jesus deserve what he got, to die. He put him in death row. He loaded him up with fear and hurt and hate. And he made the crowd yell at him, found him guilty. That's where God started, with his only begotten Son, that he made him sin for us. So there we are. We're sitting in that same cell with Barabbas. The hill of execution is just beyond our walls. And in the stillness, we're going to listen for the executioner's footsteps outside the door of our stone walls. And there we are with our head between our knees. We can't even look up when he opens the door. We don't have to lift our eyes when he speaks. We know what he's going to say. On your feet. Follow me. Stay in line. Other officers are just outside the door to accompany you. And don't do anything stupid. That's what we're going to hear. We sit very quietly there on the stool, and almost in a trance. Past reflexes make us stand up. And then the officer attending, opening the door, begins to speak. But his words aren't rude. He doesn't curse his God, and he doesn't speak condemningly to us, nor condescendingly. It's time for you guys to pay up. He doesn't say that. He doesn't. Justice is going to be finally done. He doesn't say that either. What does he say? The law is going to get even? No. You and I and Barabbas, we both hear, all of us hear the same thing. You are free to go. I'll unlock your chains. They took Jesus instead of you. The door swings open. The guard stands back. We walk out in the light of that morning sun. The chains and shackles are gone. All of our crimes are pardoned. What happened? Jesus took our sins away. Well, where did they go? Jesus took them to that hill called Calvary that you were staring at through that little window in your cell. And it was there that he received your nails. And it was there you received the Roman spear. And it was there they took your clothes and gambled them all away. And it was there you heard the angry crowd mocking you and teasing you. Do you know what you didn't hear? You didn't hear the anger of God. He poured out all his anger, not on you. He poured it out on his only begotten Son. Do you want another word for that? It's called grace. That's what it is. God says you're not guilty anymore. You're set free. His Son took your punishment. How's that for a pinch hitter? Would you call that a home run? Jesus said in John 14, I'm preparing a place for you, and if you'll accept it, it's right next to my home, and I want you there to be with me. And when you circle the third base in life, and you cross the home plate, and you score, the scoreboard is going to read that you just won the game. Christ died for me. He took my place on that cross. Now that's called grace. I think maybe that hymn writer had it right. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Newton, you were pretty bright. Some years ago, I had one of my church members in the hospital, and she was older. She suffered a stroke. Partially paralyzed, she could no longer speak. In my visits to her bedroom in the hospital, I became very disappointed in her nursing care. I found that the nurses attending her, they really didn't care. They really gave up on her, and they probably ignored her because she couldn't talk, she couldn't move, couldn't feed herself, couldn't go to the bathroom. She just became to them nothing more than a bag of feed and a bale of hay on the farm. They could carelessly and cruelly toss her around with no feelings, no professional dignity, no thought that this individual had a name. She lived a life, raised a wonderful family, served her church. To these nurses, she was just subhuman. The old lady's going to die anyway, they thought. Let her die. The quicker the better. Do you know that behavior really irritated me? There are days when I came and watched their behavior and I could have choked them. Nobody deserves that kind of treatment. It was Easter. It was Easter Day. A holiday. Stores were closed. School was out. Families were celebrating their turkey dinner. We were going to do it later. No traffic on the street. I told Mary, my wife, I'm going to the hospital. I have something I want to do. You'll have to excuse me for a while. There on the bed, curled under the blanket, was my lady. She wasn't a bag of feed. I didn't see her as a bale of hay. She was a lonely figure that morning. No family around. No nurses. No radio, no television. Nobody didn't even know she was there. It was Easter. I sat beside her and I pulled up a chair. I took her hand and I looked into her expressionless face and I looked into her eyes and I gave her pure eye contact. She quietly received me. I introduced myself. I called her by name. And I told her I'd come to see her. It was Easter Day. And I told her the story that I just told you about Barabbas. And the thing that I said to her, and I was determined that I was going to give her a lot better care than the nurses ever gave her. When I was done, I noticed that just a tiny little grin, smile, appeared on her face. And then a little tear slowly rolled down her cheek. I had just celebrated Easter, and it was the best Easter I think that I had ever had. That lady, she pinch hitted for me. And she hit the ball over the fence. She heard everything that I said. And so did her God in heaven on that Easter day. I did her funeral for her within 2 weeks of that visit. And when she crossed the border, I think her Lord looked at her and said, "Behold, I make all things new." She could see again. She could hear again. She could walk again. She could jump and run again. She could celebrate life again. Brand new. You don't suppose, I'm only guessing now, you don't suppose that Barabbas will be in heaven too with her, do you? When he was released from that prison, do you think he went home? Or maybe he followed the crowd over to the hill where an execution was going to take place, and the pinch hitter who went to bat for him was going to die on that hill on a cross. Here's something better. Think about this. Have you ever gone to the foot of the cross? Jesus is still there. He's waiting for you. And you know what he's saying to you? And he says this to Barnabas, if Barnabas was listening, or Barabbas. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And then he probably said this, "Follow me. I have a place for you." Isn't that an amazing story? Now, I was just a broadcaster. I'm just telling you what I read in the book. But the old book, it has some wonderful things that if you take it and you follow it and you obey it, it can make all things new. I'm looking for some listeners that are going to come with me that are going to be new. I hope you're one of them. See you next week.